This Old Tree, a show that features heritage trees and their human stories. You'll hear interviews with experts, historians, and regular folks to celebrate the myths and uncover the real tales. This Old Tree is sponsored by Schwartz Tree and Landscaping in Cranston, Rhode Island. Professional tree service, landscaping, and plant management. Visit schwartztreecare.com or call 401-941-4440. Now, here is your host, Doug Still.
Imagine a tree with a canopy that covers nearly 4.5 acres. Its widest spread is 204 meters, or 669 feet, large enough to accommodate 2 football fields end to end. More like a forest than a single tree, its multiple trunks are like columns supporting a protective dome of waxy, paddle-shaped leaves 80 feet high. Walk inside and the air changes, cool and comfortable. Your eyes adjust to the shade to see monkeys, birds, fruit bats, people, and a temple. Recently, I visited such a tree in India. Its name is Kabirvad, and it is spectacular. It's a banyan tree, Ficus bengalensis, which is a type of strangler fig. I'll explain later in the episode. I was invited to see it by my friend Srinivas Reddy, who goes by the name Srini. That's him playing the raga music you're listening to now with 2 friends on tabla. He's a professor of classical literature and music at the Indian Institute of Technology in Gandhinagar, which is a half-day's drive from Kabirvad. The famous tree is located on an island in the Narmada River near the city of Bharuch, and I'm going to tell you about our trip and what we saw. But that's only half the story. The name Kabirvad means Kabir's Banyan in Gujarati, the language spoken in the state of Gujarat, where the tree has stood for at least 500 years, but perhaps much longer. Kabir was a mystic poet and saint from the turn of the 16th century, and if you're from India, you not only know who he is, but you can likely recite a few lines from his poetry. But if you're like me, and most everyone else outside of India, Kabir, well, he's a cultural icon waiting to be discovered. One legend has it that Kabir lived on the island for a period, used a datun or twig as a toothpick, which he discarded, and it grew into a grand, enormous tree. Learning about Kabir became a centerpiece of my trip to Gujarat, and I'll share a few of the conversations I had with people who helped me begin to understand his spiritual force in the culture. I also had the great pleasure of interviewing one of the leading experts on Kabir's poetry and iconoclastic worldview, Linda Hess, an author and professor at Stanford University. So join me on this special extended episode as I try to find the essence of the great Saint Kabir and what his legacy has to do with the magnificent banyan tree known as Kabirvad. I'm Doug Still, and this is This Old Tree.
This old tree, standing here for more than 4 centuries. Wonder what you'd say if you could talk to me about what it's like to be this old tree.
A leaf broke from the branch. The wind blew it away. Once apart, when will they meet? It falls so far away.
A public tree dispute first brought Srini and I together during the COVID epidemic. Virtually, anyway. We met when, as City Forester of Providence, Rhode Island, I held a public meeting on Zoom to explain why 3 beautiful London plane trees along South Main Street needed to be removed for a utility project. The trees stood right next to a community garden and landscape art project known as 10,000 Suns. The community organized a protest, upset about losing these important arboreal members of the neighborhood. People attached ribbons and messages to the trees, and there was a 3-day sit-in that Srini took part in and played sitar for the demonstrators. The tree lover in me loved their energy, and I sympathized, but I was in the middle. Sadly, the trees were planted directly on top of a large electrical conduit located below the sidewalk rather than the usual location within the street. All alternative options to save them had been explored and exhausted. The public meeting was tough, but at least we announced that 62 replacement shade trees were scheduled. I think everyone would rather have just kept the 3 mature trees. Fast forward to 2024, when Srini reached out to me regarding another tree matter. We got to chatting, and he invited me over to meet in person. We bonded right away by eating specialty mangoes, playing Beatles music, and especially by talking trees. We went out to South Main Street to remember the 3 trees that were lost.
So we're on South Main Street, and this is where these 3 beautiful London plane trees stood. If you took a picture of those trees from, this perspective, you'd have these 3 beautiful trees, and then right behind, you'd see the great 3 smokestacks of Providence,
Right, the power plants.
The power plant. So it's like...
I think it's beautiful.
It's a poignant statement, The trees go and power the power.
This is right next to a garden.
Yeah.
We need to let people know and have input.
Yes. But then,
that's exactly what happened.
And then the input just falls on deaf ears, But, I mean, the trees did come down, but I learned so much personally from that whole experience. I think people that were involved in that learned so much. But, yeah, it was a very personal thing.
He was a visiting professor at Brown University, but he told me he was returning to India the following semester to teach at IIT Gandhinagar. As I tend to do, I asked him, "What's the most famous tree in India?" Unsure, he sent information that led us to Kabirvad, the massive historical banyan tree not too far from IIT. The descriptions were tantalizing to us both. Of course, I wanted to know more about Kabir and the tree's legend and began locating source material. I asked Srini what the best references are, and he stopped me right there. You can't really learn about Kabir in books. You have to experience him. His words stuck with me. I couldn't quite grasp what he meant, but an invite was extended to visit him in India to see the tree and find Kabir. If you can get yourself there, Srini said, I'll take care of you. Months later, that happened. After a 20-hour trip, I landed in Ahmedabad, a large city known for its textiles near the IIT campus where Srini was in residence. There are 23 IIT campuses throughout India, but this one was in Gandhinagar, the state capital of Gujarat. Both the city center and campus are relatively young and modern, located opposite each other along the river Sabarmati. The campus had only been completed and open to students since 2015. The landscape is flat and vegetation lush. I saw new construction everywhere along the highway from Ahmedabad, but the campus itself is a green oasis. Langurs, which are leaf-eating monkeys, roamed the campus, as did a big, bulky type of antelope known as a nilgai that shocked me the first time one passed by. Birds are everywhere, including a nest of spotted owlets I found in the hollow of an old tree. The first day, I had been out learning how to identify the native trees, which were unknown to me as a foreigner. Funny enough, I was asked to lead a tree walk on campus the following week, so I had a lot of catching up to do. In 12 short years, the campus had become an arboretum. I learned about neem trees, the Java plum or jamun tree, the towering burrflower, orchid trees, and many more. It was here that I saw a banyan tree in person for the first time.
The tree said to the leaf, "Listen, leaf, to what I say. Here's how things are in this house. One comes, another goes."
This banyan was standing in a courtyard in a paved area. It was a young tree, but it was already bursting out of a pavement opening only about 5 by 5 feet wide. The trunk was becoming hard to distinguish among a mass of quote-unquote roots dropping down from the upper branches into the limited soil, and they were becoming trunks themselves. These aerial roots are a growth feature of the banyan, which, as I said, is a type of fig tree of the genus Ficus. There are over 800 ficus species around the world, about 96 of them in India, although the number is disputed. 10 of them are common, and they thrive in wet, subtropical climates. But not all fig trees have aerial roots. That is a feature of strangler figs, a subgroup of which Ficus bengalensis is a member. A strangler fig has a unique life. It starts as a very small seed. Think of the tiny seeds you crunch on as you bite into a fig bought at the grocery store, about the same size. A sticky seed, if it's lucky, might get discarded and land in the crotch of a branch in the upper canopy of another tree of any type. There it germinates, and there is enough moisture and organic debris for the seedling to survive, for a while anyway. Very soon, the seedling pushes out thin, hair-like roots that dangle down along the trunk of the host tree, or sometimes just in open air as far out as the seedling's branches might reach. Eventually, if the seedling lives long enough, an aerial root will reach the ground below and a power shift occurs. The fig is now able to draw its own water and nutrients from the soil. The flexible roots start to form wood, thickening and hardening into trunks. With extra energy, the fig's upper branches start to reach for the sky to access better light. More aerial roots grow and drop in a tangle to vigorously grow around the trunk of the host tree and solidify, forming a network of trunk roots. The process speeds up. Eventually, you guessed it, the strangler fig expands so much that the trunk of the host tree cannot grow, its cambium layer squeezed. The host tree dies and decays over decades to the point where you can't even tell one was there, except for the hollow left within the column of fig tree roots. But the fig isn't done, not by a long shot. As branches spread horizontally, long and strong, they continue to drop aerial roots. New trunks form and new canopies of waxy leaves reach for the sky, and so on, spreading and repeating. Growing in this way, banyan trees in particular have the largest canopies in the world. The banyan tree is an ecological marvel. A single tree interacts with and supports a huge number of birds, bats, animals, invertebrates, and smaller plants of many types. In India, entire villages spring up around them and below them. It's the national tree of India, and it is sacred in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. It's important to Muslims as well, especially in Sufi traditions. The stories and mythology around banyan trees are many and varied, and I don't have the space to touch on them here. If interested, let me point you to Michael Shanahan's book, Gods, Wasps, and Stranglers, The Secret History and Redemptive Future of Fig Trees. I interviewed Mike for an early episode about the Edison banyan in Fort Myers, Florida, so you can check that out when you have some time. It's incredible to me that such a minuscule seed holds the right genetic information, the key to something so important and much larger. Metaphors about fig seeds found their way into Indian culture thousands of years ago within the Upanishads. The Upanishads are a collection of Sanskrit texts written between 800 and 200 BC that expand on the earlier ritualistic texts called the Vedas. They contain foundational ideas in Hinduism about philosophy and spiritualism. I learned about them in Illuminating Worlds, an anthology of classical Indian literature that Srini had just published and shared with me, for which he did the translations. I included a link to it in the show notes. Srini includes a passage from the Chandogya Upanishad within his book, which has a conversation between a father and a son that reads as follows, and pardon my pronunciations. "Please, wise father, teach me more," said Shvetaketu, and Udalaka Aruni replied, "So be it, my son. Bring a fig over here." "Here it is, wise father." "Cut it open." "It is open, wise father." "What do you see there?" "Many tiny seeds, wise father." "Break one of those seeds." "It is broken, wise father." "What do you see there?" "Nothing at all, wise father." Then he said to him, "My son, there is a subtle essence which you cannot see, and truly, my son, it is because of the very essence that this great fig tree stands tall. Trust me, my son. That which is the subtle essence of the true self is the whole world. That is the truth. That is the self. Shvetaketu, You are that. This was an idea that one can see again and again. To find man's purpose and sense of self and God, one needs to look inward, not toward dogma or the grandiose. The nature of the universe can be found in a seed, a drop of water, a flower. As I came to learn, Kabir expresses these same themes 1,000 years later.
Don't wander in outer gardens. Your body is a bloom. Sit on 8 lotuses and behold the countless forms within.
Looking at the banyan tree in the paved courtyard at IIT, I thought it was like an elephant in a cage bucking at its enclosure. Its outer aerial roots fell harmlessly to the pavement outside the tree pit, if they weren't already pruned away by the maintenance staff. But tied up inside it was so much more, an essence that suggested the history of India itself. My thoughts went to Kabirvad, the Ficus bengalensis that we plan to visit the following week. But that had to wait. It was Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights and a national holiday. It was special to be there at that time. We lit small clay lamps called deepa that Indians light outside their homes to symbolize the inner light that protects from spiritual darkness. We visited a classroom of children learning about Diwali, and then dropped in on a campus celebration around a gorgeous rangoli on the pavement of a courtyard, which is a design made of colored powders and sand during festivals. Life slows down a bit, and Srini and I were invited to friends' homes for several dinners and brunches. Friends and new friends are often welcomed into the home at Diwali to celebrate the holiday and share delicious homemade food. It was also the perfect time for me to ask questions about Kabir, and I brought my mic. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll listen to what people had to say off the cuff when asked about Kabir. I also meet with Linda Hess, a leading authority on Kabir, who speaks about experiencing him through music and song. This is the story of visiting India's Kabirvad banyan tree. You're listening to This Old Tree. Hello, I'm Doug Still, the host of This Old Tree, and I'd like to talk to you about Schwartz Tree Care. I've known owner Dave Schwartz for nearly 2 decades, and he understands how important your trees are to you and your property. He has 52 years of experience in tree work, and the crews at Schwartz Tree Care are trained to the highest professional standards. Schwartz specializes in natural pruning, but they offer all manner of tree and shrub care, including pest management, fertilization, landscape design, and installation. Every property has its strengths and weaknesses, and with this in mind, Dave works with you to develop a viable management strategy. They make your property look like it has never been touched. Natural, gorgeous, and sustainable. Arrange for a free estimate by visiting schwartztreecare.com or call 401-941-4440. Schwartz Tree Care. Get the best for your property. Hi, I'm Doug Still, and we're back with This Old Tree. What's your name?
Avijit Lakhia.
So, who was Kabir to you?
He was a poet, a kind of a Sufi kind of, basically like an old poet, you know. That's a romantic in the stories I heard.
Yes.
And also somebody who kind of was not Hindu, Muslim, or anything like that, you know. He was revered as a poet, and that's it.
Abi and his family had invited Srini and I to dinner. We were having drinks up on the roof of his family home, a 400-year-old house in a Pol, P-O-L, one of the historic, tight-knit neighborhoods of the old city in Ahmedabad. You can hear the fireworks of Diwali in the background. Everyone I met in India at least knew who Kabir was. Do you know any of his songs or poems?
No. But maybe without knowing them, because, all these like Hindi songs and stuff, they all actually come from all kinds of old sayings and shairis and poetry, and I guess he was a shirer.
And I don't know what that is.
Let's say, it's like this double saying, it's a thing. Shairi, it's a poetry, a public poetry.
Abi hit on something I learned almost right away. Saint Kabir didn't associate with any one religion, even though Hindus, Muslims, and Jains all claim him. But he was a spiritual figure nonetheless. Here's an explanation from a man I met at a garden party named Jayraj Bhatt, a businessman and uncle to Rajiv Bhatt, a friend of Srini and one of the tabla players in the music we've heard.
But all the theme about his poems was spirituality, because basically he was a saint, a kind of saint which was above all the religions, because Kabir always said that the inner realization of the truth is above all the religions, because he made it so clear a difference between religion and spirituality. Religion is about all mental beliefs, dogmas, your theories, and the kind of rules, whereas spirituality is freedom, is the realization, is the vision, is the experience. That is what he always insisted. And so one story is very famous in India about Kabir, that when he died, when he left his body, the Hindu means the religion that is prevailing in India. So Hindus said that he is a Hindu saint, so we will take him to cremation ground. But the Muslim, the other faith, they said no, he is a Muslim saint, because he talked about everybody, because he was above all the religions. So he always said that be true to your religion, whatever faith you have, but be true. Then you will get the truth. But if you are not true inside, if you are not sincere, you will not get anything. So,
for some Indians, Kabir was the source of a life lesson that comes in the form of a doha, D-O-H-A, which is a two-line rhyming couplet in Hindi verse. Here's one from the wife of Rajiv after we found a quiet place to talk. Okay, could you state your name?
My name is Anuja.
Anuja. And you're going to read a doha.
That's right, a Kabir doha.
A Kabir doha. Okay.
Dheere dheere re mana, dheere sab kuch hoye. And the meaning is, be slow and everything will be all right.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next doha is from Sudhanshu Sharma, a professor of chemistry at IIT, who invited me to meet him in his office. He's also a poet himself.
My memory about Kabir Das, which is his full name, goes back to when we were reading about his birth, stories, and couplets, what he used to write, which is in Hindi called as dohas. Dohas, yeah. So this goes back to my school days, and we had, usually in schools, you have a prayer ground, and then you assemble, and then prayer happens. So there are one couplet which every day we used to recite is Bura jo dekhan mein chala bura na miliya koi, jo dil khoja apna mujhse bura na koi. It means I was looking for the bad things around the world, and I could not find. But when I looked inside my heart, I found that I was the worst person in this world. So it means you have to correct first yourself, then only you can see the world.
Wow!
So this was the couplet which you used to recite
every day,
and this is where I got to know that this is Kabir.
It's amazing that you have these memorized, but you've been thinking about them your whole life.
Yes.
It's been said that Kabir means different things to different people. Not a lot is known about his actual life, so people find the Kabir they want to find. At another gathering, I actually met a man named Kabir, so I had to ask him about it. Okay, could you state your name?
My name is Kabir, and my last name is Jasuja.
Wonderful. And could you tell me about how you were named Kabir?
So it's very interesting. I was named by my father after the famous Saint Kabir. My father was in post office, and he used to read a lot of books that used to come in mails. And he had in his mind that when his second child would be born, he would likely name him after the Saint Kabir if it is a boy.
I see. So you're the second child.
Yes. I feel it had an important role to play in how I think I developed my character. I remember that when I was in school, people used to ask me what is the meaning of my name, and my teachers used to tell me that there used to be this famous Saint Kabir, and I used to always be curious and go to the library who Saint Kabir was, and it was at that moment of time when I used to read his dohas, I realized that how he used to weave complex ideas, spiritual ideas, into simple words.
Could you recite one?
Yes. There is this very important, one of the first dohas of Kabir that I remember learning. The doha goes as Guru Gobind do khade kake lago paye bali hari guru aapne Govind diyo milaye. The meaning of this doha is that a student is asking that in front of me I have my teacher and I have my God. So whom should I go first? Kabir Daji says that you should first go to your teacher, because if a right teacher is not there, you would have never met your God. So in Indian tradition, it was one of the most important dohas that made me realize the importance of finding a right teacher in your spiritual journey.
I met Kabir's father and mother at this family gathering, and they had to be the sweetest people in the world. Everyone I met was so friendly and welcoming, down to the person. Srini is part of a wonderful community in Gujarat. I could see why he wanted to return to India after years of being away. Gujarat is a relatively conservative state. Alcohol is banned, and there are many traditional norms that are important to practice within Gujarati culture. The state has its own language, and the cuisine has a sweet side to it. Narendra Modi, the conservative Prime Minister of India, was born in Gujarat and rose to power here. He has particular pride for the state, and his government has made considerable investments in modernizing its infrastructure. A long, difficult history of division between Hindus and Muslims exists. It's a deep-seated conflict that persists strongly in some pockets, but is fought against just as strongly in others. In my limited exposure, I found that the people of Gujarat look out for each other. According to Srini, you must depend on other people in India. Social isolation is not really an option. Everyday existence, food, transportation, information, contacts, is helped greatly if you know a guy, or know somebody who knows a guy. That's essential to get things done and make life work. And people are highly connected by cell phone via an extensive 5G network that reaches everywhere. And as an urban forester used to managing trees and sidewalks, I couldn't help but observe the streetscapes during our several visits into the dense urban center of Ahmedabad. India is rough around the edges, and I mean that quite literally along the streets. Curbs are often lacking, and parking areas in front of nice buildings are dusty and unpaved. The transition between building and street is filled randomly with bikes, called cycles, motorcycles, called bikes, parked rickshaws or tuk-tuks, cars, and garbage littered everywhere. Pedestrians just sort of walk along the side of the street around everything, the chaotic traffic flowing around you. I had to learn the unofficial right-of-way rules that all Indians know, get over the fear, and build trust that drivers of moving vehicles saw me and would adjust, horns beeping. Add to that lots of stray dogs, and sometimes cows. And the city trees were remarkable to me. They squeeze into the tightest, most inhospitable places, wherever they can without tree lawns or planned spaces. In holes in the pavement, compacted open soil, against buildings, in very narrow medians, sometimes smack dab in the middle of the street with no tree pit to speak of. But there they were, growing nonetheless, astounding to the eye of a Western arborist. In particular, neem trees survive in these tough conditions that would doom a linden, oak, or maple tree. One last observation, and some foreshadowing prior to the visit to Kabirvad. Smoke is everywhere. Wherever you go, the center of Ahmedabad, the countryside, the campus of IIT, there is always a little smoke in the air, and sometimes a lot. Said Srini, and this is a direct quote, "There is always something on fire in India, garbage, leaves, incense, or even people." It adds to the larger smog problem, a serious air quality issue. One morning, I got up and looked directly at the sun at sunrise, its rays mediated through smog. But this is not news to anyone. For a visitor, it's just part of the experience, and I have to say, you just kind of get used to it. Surprisingly, this doesn't make India smell bad. It's a bit smoky, but incense wafts from homes and concession areas, and the trees, shrubs, and flowers are highly fragrant and make the air sweet.
Much thinner than water, subtler than smoke, swifter than wind, Kabir's friend.
Mahatma Gandhi was born in Gujarat, in the port town of Porbandar. Following his return from South Africa, he established an ashram on the outskirts of Ahmedabad and lived there for 12 years. It was comprised of very simple buildings surrounded by farmland on the banks of the Sabarmati River, although now it's an urban neighborhood of the expanding city. It became a meeting place and symbol of resistance during the Indian independence movement. Today, it is a charming little museum that you can visit. Srini took me there, and we chatted about Kabir and his influence on Gandhiji. So we're at Gandhi's ashram.
Yes, beautiful.
Does it go by another name?
Sabarmati Ashram is a specific name, and then I think Satygraha Ashram, the insistence on nonviolence, or insistence on truth, was I think the other name. But yeah, this is one of my favorite places to come. It's so peaceful. You really feel Gandhi's presence.
And the river's right behind us.
Yeah, the Sabarmati River is right behind us.
And we just walked by Gandhi's house, and we're sitting underneath a tree next to a small building. Who lived in this building?
Mirabai lived here, one of Gandhi's British devotees.
Very small rooms, very simple.
Very simple. Simple living, high thinking.
And you used to come here, you said, when you lived in Ahmedabad?
Yeah, regularly. I loved coming here. I mean, we lived closer, so it was fun to just come in the morning, especially in the morning. It's really peaceful.
But we were talking about Kabir, and I have a question about Kabir.
Sure.
And Gandhi.
Okay.
Very basic question.
Yeah.
How did the teachings of Kabir or the songs of Kabir influence Gandhi?
I don't know specifically. There might be some instances we could look. I'm sure Gandhi quoted Kabir verses from time to time. That's something we could research. But from my knowledge of both of those people, certainly probably the biggest theme that you could get to was having Hindu-Muslim unity. I mean, Kabir himself belonged to both communities and kind of always preached a message of communalism and enjoying in the bliss of just God, whatever you want to call that force. And I think, as we know from Gandhiji's own life, a very committed Hindu, but very much dedicated to harmony between Hindu and Muslim communities. So in that sense, I think they're both very committed to the idea of transcending these religious or communal boundaries and just seeing the common humanity and the common land and the common situation and the common home that we all share and celebrating that. Kabir, I mean, I'm from South India, but especially in North India, my guru is from North India. Actually spent his first job was in Ahmedabad. He used to quote Kabir lines to me all the time because that's how it is. Every part of India has their poets, but Kabir is kind of one of those that really made his way all across India. it's like folk wisdom. So his dohe, like these 2-line couplets, you know, your people's grandmas will say sometimes, or my grandfather used to say one to me all the time. You know, like
passed down from generation to generation.
So it's like folk wisdom, you know, and they're very simple but beautifully put little phrases, you know. Yeah, this is the wisdom that gets passed down orally, and they're all like contextual for life. You know,
right.
You're like something happens where, you know, somebody does something wrong or some trouble happens, and then, you know, your mom will quote some Kabir or some Vamana or some whatever that will like explain that situation and make everything okay, or give you the right advice to deal with it.
I love that. I can't remember my grandparents quoting any poetry to me.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's folk wisdom that gets passed down when you don't even realize where it's from.
Right.
You know, I think of, like, people quote Shakespeare all the time and they don't know it.
That's right. Which is interesting because, so, like, in that case, you're quoting Shakespeare, which probably Shakespeare did right, let's say, but you don't know it's him. Whereas in India, what often happens is people like come up with a verse, and it probably wasn't written by Kabir, but they're like, oh, well, Kabir said this. So it's almost like the opposite.
Kabir-like.
Yeah, Kabir-like.
Something he would have said.
He would have said, exactly.
So it's more of a feeling.
It's more of a feeling, totally. And then there's always a little like twist to Kabir poems, you know?
Right, a turn.
Yeah, a turn, and that's what brings the insight.
Right, contrariness.
Yes, exactly.
If the seed is God's form, then Pandit, why talk on about knowledge? No body, no mind, no ego, no 3 qualities. Nectar and poison bloom. Countless fruits ripen on one tree. So the Vedas and wise ones say. Kabir says, I agree. Now tell me, who gets caught and who goes free? If the seed is God's form, then Pandit, why talk on about knowledge?
I turn to Linda Hess, a writer, scholar, and professor emerita in the Department of Religious Studies at Stanford University. She's written 5 books on Kabir and numerous scholarly papers. A specific focus of hers is to understand Kabir's words as oral tradition, as songs to be performed and listened to live. I learned so much from our conversation. Linda, thanks so much for joining me on this old tree.
It's fun.
How long have you been studying Kabir, and how would you describe your work and what you do?
Well, a really, really long time. So, well, if you want a really clean number, let's say I started in the mid to late 1970s, although we could say even a little earlier. But let's say that's when I worked in India on a PhD dissertation that was all about Kabir. So that's a long time ago, isn't it?
Yes.
And I've been working not with equal intensity every single decade, but anyway, with a lot of intensity at the present moment on a very big collection of Kabir poetry it's going to be published by Harvard University Press in a series of translations of Indian literature from many languages.
When do you expect that out?
Sometime in the next year. We're just completing, I have a co-author on the book, and we're completing all the last checking right now.
Great. So on the most basic level, who was Kabir? How would you describe him in your words?
So Kabir lived in the 15th century. Almost nothing can be said with certainty about him because we don't have documentation. We have a lot of stories. But, and to understand who he was even a little, you have to think about authors and kind of cultural situations in India quite differently than you would here or in Europe. But anyway, he lived in the 15th century and on until about the early couple of decades of the 16th century, meaning he died around 1518, we believe. He was a weaver, which was a fairly low status community in the still teeming holy city of Varanasi in North India, which is a a Hindu pilgrimage center on the Ganges River, and has been, some say it's the longest continuing existing ancient city, thousands of year old city that has never stopped being alive. So he lived there in a culture that was a mix of Hindus and Muslims. He probably was illiterate, and yet he composed this great poetry, and he didn't write it down. And yet we have so many poems with his name on them. So the reason that we have that is that so much of Indian literature came alive in an oral tradition, especially this type of literature, meaning vernacular literature, literature in poetry in the language that people speak and are raised up in, and poetry that's understood by ordinary people, not Sanskrit, not elite poetry. So it traveled, it was sung, it traveled on the oral tradition, and eventually people started writing it down. So anyway, he was this amazing, powerful person, uneducated in a formal way, of a very humble class of people, didn't write, didn't read, sang, spoke, people gathered around him, and what he composed had an amazing effect on people. But he was part of a tradition of poets who did that, poets and singers.
I see. Did he have a guru?
So everything you might ask will be controversial. Because the only things we know for sure, he lived in Varanasi, he was a weaver, he lived approximately that time. Everything else is disputed. Most people believe he did have a guru, and the guru's name was Ramananda, and he was a very famous high caste Brahmin guru who normally at that time, a Brahmin wouldn't take on a low caste person like the Kabir. But there are stories about how it happened, and these are some of the popular stories about Kabir and other poets.
You mentioned that he was born in Varanasi. Did he travel as well throughout his life?
Your guess is as good as mine. He could well have traveled, but of course there are places far to the east and far to the west of Varanasi that claim he was there. Far to the east is the city of Puri in Orisha, where there's a kind of pilgrimage spot that says this is where Kabir was. And far to the west, as you know well, in Gujarat, there's this famous tree, and they say that Kabir was there and did some great things there. I don't know if he traveled. He might have traveled.
So that brings me to a point that different religious traditions claim Kabir as their own. Could you explain that? What's universal in his poetry and ideology?
He was very remarkable in this regard. Most of the great poets, there's a long tradition of devotional, mystical poets in the different regions of India who composed or wrote, depending on whether they were writing in their vernacular language, as opposed to writing in an elite language like Sanskrit or Persian. So these poets can usually easily be associated with either Hindu traditions or Islamic mystical traditions, Sufi traditions, starting, around the 13th, 14th century when there were more and more Muslims living in India. But Kabir was a person who really transcended those identities deliberately. He refused those identities. He criticized those identities. And he himself came out of a very mixed culture. Family and community were identified as Muslims, and yet they still had a lot of Hindu influence in their lives. And you can tell that by what comes up in his poetry and by what we know about the culture of those days. So he was a very sharp observer of society, even though he was also a very deep mystic whose poetry probes the sort of most profound nature of what it is to be a human being and what it is to understand, our body and our mind and our confusion and our suffering and the possibility of our liberation and what people talk about as God or ultimate reality. All of that he probed in a deeply inward way. But he also observed society, and he had a very sharp critical eye, and he criticized all kinds of foolishness and hypocrisy, and he criticized caste in a very fearless sort of a way. And he relentlessly criticized religious sectarianism and fighting and hatred. So he urged people to get beyond all that. And so that is why different religious communities can claim and identify with him. Sufis, Muslim Sufis, he became important in those communities. And you can still see that mainly in Pakistan, not as much in India. Sufi singers sing Kabir. Hindus definitely claimed Kabir, and more over the centuries, the stories about him made him look more and more close to the Hindu communities. The Sikhs claimed him and actually wrote him into their sacred book. Their sacred book, which is called the Guru Granth Sahib, has a lot of poetry in it by the Sikh gurus and also by the non-Sikhs who they revered. And of those non-Sikh mystics, Kabir is the top one, the one that they have the largest collection. So
remarkable.
Everybody could claim him, but nobody could possess him if they really read his poetry. If they really listened to those songs, they would see that. One of the ironies of a teacher like Kabir, and there have been others, in fact, most of the founders of religions in history have been like that. They'll teach something and then their followers will form it, will get themselves institutionalized, and then they will turn around upside down and pervert the teachings of that teacher. So even though he constantly tried to wake people up to their delusions, including their religious identities and hostilities, the second he was born, the legend says, the second he died, according to this popular legend, the Hindu and Muslim devotees started fighting over his body. And the Hindus said, we must burn him, we must cremate him and recite mantras from the Vedas. And the Muslims said, no, we must bury him and recite verses from the Quran. And they actually start to fight. They pull out their weapons. And, this is a supreme irony when it comes to Kabir.
Right.
And somebody goes and lifts up the shroud under which the body has been lain, and there's nothing there but a pile of flowers. So the Hindus take half of the flowers and the Muslims take half of the flowers, and they bury it or they burn it and they recite the mantras and verses that they want to recite. Also, I'd like to say that you don't have to be religious to claim him. He is popular among secular people too, because of his eye on society and because of his sort of profound, what we might call egalitarianism and humanitarianism. I know quite a few people who claim his greatness and who sort of put aside the more mystical and religious stuff and who really just claim him as a great humanitarian.
How would you describe his poetry? Do you have an example of a particular poem that is essential in his philosophy or the way we think about him?
I would choose one to represent his sharp satirical observation of the social world and also of human psychology, like he nails us. And I would choose one or two which would be powerful observation. He urges people to wake up, and so they would be observations about the imminence of death and how that's right in front of us and how we've refused to look at it. And there would be some very beautiful poems of actual liberation and joy. Kabir is most famous for two types of forms, poetic forms. One is what I would call a song poem, which has, like 8 lines or something, and that really is sung. That's how it's kind of come through the centuries. And one is a couplet, which is a kind of pithy proverbial thing that gets quoted everywhere, and also it can be sung.
I'd like to ask you about the songs of Kabir. So you've written this wonderful book, Bodies of Song, Kabir, Oral Traditions, and Performative Worlds in North India. In it, you said that to understand Kabir, you need to engage with learning in the body. Could you describe what you mean?
Yes. So very simply, we could just think about the difference between reading a poem on a page and singing. If you think about that for 5 seconds, then you understand what I mean by learning in the body. If you sing, even if you listen to music and you're not singing, your whole body is engaged in a way that it is unlikely to be when you're reading a poem on a page. Of course, if you really deeply read poetry, because it speaks in rhythms and sounds and metaphors, you will be engaged in a bodily way, but it's much more refined. Just sing and see what that means. It engages your breath, your voice, you vibrate, you feel it in different parts of your body. You want to get up, you want to jump, you want to sway. That's the power of music.
I think we've all felt that.
Yes. So when I turned from my work as a writer, scholar, translator, which was mainly based on texts, that's the way I was trained, studying literature. When I turned, and I'd been thinking of doing this for years before I finally did it, to a project where I was living with singers in this vibrant folk music tradition.
And that's the Kabir Project?
Well, no, the Kabir Project began independently of me, and I began my work independently of it. And we met in the field near the beginning of both of our projects. So the Kabir Project was also engaged very much in these living singing traditions. But I came independently to work with the living singing traditions with my, this was in the year 2002, and I had been in the village with this now even more famous singer whose picture is on the cover of my book.
What's his name?
His name is Prahlad Singh Tipania. He's a village man. He lives in Madhya Pradesh in central India, in this Hindi-speaking region. And by the time I started my project in the beginning of 2002, he was already pretty well known. But today, 22 years later, he's very famous, I started my project at the beginning of that year, and Shabnam started her project, which is a filmmaking project, late in that year, and we met in his area, and we said, oh, wow, our projects are very similar.
A quick aside, Shabnam Vermani is a documentary filmmaker who has made a series of incredible films about Kabir and the contemporary musicians who perform his work for audiences. She just published a book called Burn Down Your House, Provocations from Kabir. I'll include it in the show notes.
And then we started hanging out together, and we really hit it off, and we loved being together. And so in many ways, our projects intersected.
Was there someone you met through the Kabir Project that surprised you or that also helped deepen your understanding of Kabir?
Yeah, many people. Sometimes, and you can meet these people in Shabnam's films. The films are really great. Sometimes it would be some old man. Again, I got this from Shabnam. She found some of these people. Some old man in a village who is never going to be on an international stage. He's never even going to be on a stage in the local provincial capital or in Delhi, like some of these singers are. But he is amazing, He is like I'm thinking of one particular person in one of her films who was not literate. He was an old man, but the knowledge he had was just amazing. People have internalized this and embody it themselves, and the way he could speak about it, the way he could gesture about it. Oh, I should mention that the people for whom Kabir is particularly iconic are low caste people, Dalits, Dalit is the name that is preferred by people who used to be called untouchables, who were the most degraded and oppressed of anybody in the caste system of India. For them, Kabir is a great hero because he was, although not technically of the Dalit or formerly untouchable class, he was of a very low status in the caste system. And now they feel that his greatness enhances their status and respect in the society, and it does. And each one of these experiences shines in its own right. All of them are there in my memory and in my gratitude.
I'd like to turn now to Kabir and trees.
Okay.
Are there any tree references or metaphors in his poetry, and specifically about banyan trees?
I don't know any in all of this poetry and song that I've encountered. I've never seen a particular reference to the banyan. The tree comes up as a metaphor quite often. Usually it's not a particular tree. The tree is mostly a metaphor, and it's a metaphor again for something in the human body and for yogic experience that happens in the human body. So the fullest evocation of a tree is of a very strange upside down tree that whose roots are in the air and that is full of paradoxes. It has no branches, trees, or leaves, but it flourishes and flowers. Then there are other sort of lovely random imagery of trees, including, for example, and I can quote this. This is a couplet that's pithy and nice, but I have to dig it up for you. Again, it's a symbol of transiency and an exhortation. I was looking for that word. It's an exhortation to wake up and to live while you're alive. It says, a wind comes and blows the leaf far from the tree. Once it's far from the tree, it's never going to come back to the tree.
What is the likelihood that Kabir visited the island on the Narmada River where Kabirvad stands?
Let us imagine that he did. Because Kabir sometimes, in fact, often, people, including the singer that I work with, and including some scholars who appreciate that this kind of poetry and this kind of song and this kind of life in a living culture goes beyond what you can document historically. They will say things like, Kabir is more than an individual. He's like a flowing river that tributaries come and join and that lives in the lives of the people. So let's say that Kabir is there still. You visited that place. You found that people go there because they feel that Kabir is there. Let's say he was there. And actually the amazing quality of the banyan tree, how it sends forth its branches and they become new trunks and it spreads and spreads, is a wonderful metaphor for the oral tradition itself, which spreads like that. You can use a metaphor of river and tributaries and rain, but the banyan tree itself is a beautiful metaphor like that grows and takes on its own life and has new trunks and shelters people and inspires in places where you wouldn't have guessed it at the beginning. It's a great living monument to Kabir.
I'm going to end with this question. What does Kabir's poetry mean to you personally?
Yeah, it means a very vibrant experience, which most deeply has to do with an inner awareness of stillness, which we very rarely know. But then emanating out from that, I see how that relates to the whole fluctuating, colorful world. He was able to do both of those things.
Linda, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I learned so much about your thoughtful research and about Kabir.
Well, it was wonderful to be on such a show as yours. I really like your show. So thank you for asking me.
After another short break, we visit Kabirvad. This is This Old Tree. Hello, I'm Doug Still, the host of This Old Tree, and I'd like to talk to you about Schwartz Tree Care. I've known owner Dave Schwartz for nearly 2 decades, and he understands how important your trees are to you and your property. He has 52 years of experience in tree work, and the crews at Schwartz Tree Care are trained to the highest professional standards. Schwartz specializes in natural pruning, but they offer all manner of tree and shrub care, including pest management, fertilization, landscape design, and installation. Every property has its strengths and weaknesses, and with this in mind, Dave works with you to develop a viable management strategy. They make your property look like it has never been touched. Natural, gorgeous, and sustainable. Arrange for a free estimate by visiting schwartztreecare.com or call 401-941-4440. Schwartz Tree Care. Get the best for your property. Hi, I'm Doug Still, and we're back with This Old Tree. As I said, in India, it helps to know a guy. A colleague of Srini's at IIT, Professor Pandey, happened to be a former manager with the Gujarat State Forest Department, the bureau that manages Kabirvad. Hearing that we were going to see the tree, he made a call. Soon, we had an appointment to meet the current state forester the day of our upcoming journey, a man named Ronak Kavadia. Srini and I met the young forester late morning on a Thursday in the city of Bharuch, and also met up with 3 other friends interested in seeing the tree with us, a professor of earth sciences named Vikrant Jain, his son Shrenik, and a graduate student named Sunny Jha. The forestry staff provided a sit-down lunch, and then I interviewed Mr. Kevadia. He had only a couple months on the job as range forest officer. I asked him about his responsibilities.
As a forest officer, it is my duty to protect forest land, then grow some plantations on the trees. So we have to manage our wildlife that is staying inside the forest. We have to give some livelihood to the forest department people, and all these are the main responsibility of our. Apart from this, we have also responsibility of preserving our heritage banyan tree. So that is called as Kabirvad. It is declared as a protected forest. So no one can go inside, no one can harm the tree.
Is it a sacred grove?
Yes, it is sacred grove because it is being named after Saint Kabir. So Saint Kabir is our very renowned Bhakti saint. He was there in the 15th century in India, 15th to 16th century, I think.
Yes.
So it is named after that saint. So there is some religious belief also associated with this tree.
Yes.
So it is considered as a very much a sacred grove of not only Bharuch but also whole Gujarat and whole India also.
What does it mean to be a sacred grove in India? Means there are extra protections?
Yes, extra protection. We can't allow to cut any banyan branches, prop roots. So we also taking measures to help grow the tree. So like we are whatever the new prop roots are there. So we are enclose that prop root in one steel cage and tube, so that it can go into the ground very easily.
I see. So the aerial root that's falling from the branch, you put a tube around it.
Yes, around tube, so we can enclosure safety also. So what we are doing is we are putting some steel tube around their prop roots. we are filled that tube with manure and soil and everything, so that it can grow some growing environment, so that it can go into the ground very early and it can establish into a well-formed trunk.
Interesting.
Yes.
Ronak didn't come with us, but he assigned 2 foresters as guides. They were more like park rangers, impeccably dressed in well-pressed uniforms with epaulets, caps, badges, and polished shoes. Our fired-up entourage drove 30 minutes through rural countryside with wandering groups of water buffalo and Dalits working the fields, many of them women. We parked near the ferry boat that would take us across the Narmada River to the island. Concession booths lined our walk to the river, offering water, snacks, fruit, and souvenirs for tourists and pilgrims visiting Kabirvad. We got a sweeping view of the river as we descended down some stairs to the shoreline. It was smooth and calm, flowing very slowly. There are sheep and goats. It suddenly got very hot.
Out in the open.
There are crocodiles in the Narmada, but disappointingly, I didn't see any. Our group walked onto a floating dock made of plastic cubes, about 50 yards long out to where the boats moor. We were really feeling the heat now, 95 degrees, but it felt even hotter in the direct sun. We waited for the ferry to arrive and were joined by groups of Indian tourists, mostly families. There were 29 of us on the boat. So is that it? Or across the water? That's the island?
Ah, that's the island.
It must be that. There we are.
Yes.
Kabirvad?
Yes, Kabirvad.
On the other side, we hopped out and walked up a hot, dusty slope. We're passing a herd of goats. I'm holding onto my mic. There were more concessions, staffed by people who looked like they were struggling. We walked under an arch of connected logs, possibly made of cement, that looked like a schematic elephant. There was a wall of green ahead, but it was hard to tell what Kabirvad was at this point. But clearly, we were to enter through an archway of foliage. We stepped through.
Now I'll know only the king's story, breaking forth from the luminous center, Ram's light, the Guru's word, the path. A tree, form of the infinite, revealed by awareness. No trunk or branch, no flower or fruit, nectar flowing, sound undying. A bee, aroused by the sweet scent of a lotus, presses the 12 to its heart. In the midst of 16, a blast of wind. Fruit blooms in the sky. Meditation in utter simplicity waters the tree. Earth soaks up the sea. Kabir says, I'll walk with anyone who has seen that tree.
Our eyes adjusted to the dark shade the bright sun left behind. There, the tree's full glory came into focus. To truly appreciate a banyan, you need to stand beneath it, or inside it. A stunning conglomeration of trunk groupings spread out as far as we could see, connected in both upper and lower canopies with large, horizontal branches as thick as trees. Surprisingly, large expanses of open ground separated the trunks, calling us to walk in and explore, to look up and down and directly through. Kabirvad appeared to be a woodland with a high canopy, spacious and airy. But it wasn't a woodland, not really. It was one tree. Wow.
Here we go.
The wows left our mouths, and we all fanned out a bit, although the Gujarati foresters stayed close to me. Each trunk was a feast for the eyes, pulsing with intertwined aerial roots and trunks and branches. The amount of biomass was stunning. I could see up close how horizontal branches were supported with new trunks, but also sent new scaffold leaders straight up into the canopy dome. The steel tubes that Ronak spoke about could be seen scattered around, protecting the thin, dangling aerial roots from damage. They were painted yellow by the forestry department. Indian families crowded in front of trees and sat on branches to pose for photos. I took a lot of pictures myself. Concession tables were along the path inside the tree too, and one thing was very noticeable. A very loud, pounding sound reverberated everywhere, made by a machine crushing sugar cane. You couldn't escape the noise, except maybe on the far end of the site. My thought was such a thing wouldn't be allowed next to, say, the General Sherman tree or another National Park Service attraction in the States. But despite Kabirvad being a sacred grove, people were living and working here, surviving under the protective branches, probably like people have for 5 centuries. Another pervasive sound was the swish-swish of straw brooms wielded by female workers, raking the ever-falling debris from the tree into piles. The piles are swept to the edges, and to get rid of them, they are burned. The smell of smoke pervaded the air. Our group gathered again on the central paved path, which took a turn into an open plaza. On one side is a 3-story building, possibly a guest house for visitors or pilgrims. Next to that is a house, but most importantly, a pink, modern temple to Kabir can be found here. We took our shoes off on the steps and climbed up to the 2nd floor overlooking the landscape. Photography was not allowed. The whole scene was remarkable. A small complex of buildings inside a tree. A few other species of trees were growing in this center area along with Kabirwad's banyan trunks. Some grew up against buildings, causing cracks in masonry and pavement. If given to their own devices, the trees would obviously reclaim this plaza and the buildings within it. Banyans are strangler figs after all. We continued to walk through the tree. Families of langurs were everywhere, the same monkeys seen at IIT. They were leaping in the trees, on the walls, and on the ground, very active. The babies were adorable. Langurs coexist with humans without much harassment or conflict. Other animal life was plainly visible. One area of canopy above had a colony of very, very large bats fluttering about. They are the Indian flying fox, or giant fruit bat. The wingspan is 4 to 5 feet, one of the largest bat species in the world. They eat fruit and help disperse seeds. They were impressive and quite intimidating. Eventually, we reached an area at the far, far end of the tree. Srini, Vikrant, and I sat down on a log to have a chat. You were born ready?
Ready. From day one, I was ready.
Well, we're here sitting under Kabirvad. And after spending a bit of time here, what are your general impressions?
It's just kind of breathtaking, actually, to see the tangle of life that can create a structure like this. I feel like it's a type of architecture, natural architecture.
I think a tangle is a good word.
Yeah, and you can't really figure it all out. It's too complex to, map it all out because it flows on top of each other itself. It happens over hundreds of years, and then you just see this architecture. That was the word I was telling Vikrant. It seems like a type of architecture.
Yes. With spaces in between.
Yeah.
Large spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I have never seen such a large tree in terms of the area. And as Srini had mentioned, is provided natural architecture. Besides this, I'm also seeing its impact and its relationship with the river. And
that's your specialty, is studying the river.
Yeah, that's my interest, is facility, I don't know. But that's my interest, to work on the river, to understand the river behavior processes. And what I'm seeing that this big tree is able to hold this space under this big river. It's a high energy river. Narmada is known for that. And if we see the older satellite images, there are the areas where the bank erosion has been there. But this tree is really intact. It is holding the space. And so it's maintained that space for itself. So with them, we come to know that we don't know the exact age, but the idea is that it may be 400, 500, or maybe 1,000 year old. There's no dating of this tree, and in fact, we don't know that which is the main trunk, and without knowing the main trunk, it cannot be dated. That's the thing.
Srini, what are you hearing and smelling and sensing?
Well, we came across the river on this boat, so we had some of the just life signs of the boats and the river moving along. But the big thing that I was smelling was the smoke. You know, people are gathering the leaves and burning the leaves, which also creates kind of a mystical atmosphere when the smoke goes up into the branches.
That's right. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, and you know, like temples also have a lot of smoke. You're burning incense. And so it's like you're entering this tree temple. It's like the feeling I got when we first got here. And it has a kind of aura about it. And it's kind of dark inside. And in terms of the look, though, what I was thinking is like, it looks like this creature, you know, like moving its hands and then putting hands down somewhere, and then like another arm is coming somewhere else and putting its 5 fingers down. It's like this huge tree creature.
And I'm seeing these protective metal tubes around the aerial roots so that people are messing with sometimes, and they want to protect the tree. Is there anything you didn't expect?
So no, but it's really nice to see how well it has been protected, because they're saying that if those small, these tree roots are there, and when they grow during winter time period, these langur actually eats those branches. Oh. So they protect those branches, and that's how it's there. I was not expecting that they are so young, because this protection has started around 15 years old. So it means that all the like muscular branches, it looks like 50, 60 years old, but now we know that they are only 10, 15 years old. Mm-hmm. So the growth of tree is also faster, and that is
very fast.
That is very fast, and it can be explained by the presence of river, lots of water, lots of nutrient, everything is there, and tree is strong. So
the soil looks rich.
Soil is rich, all those things. So all those things are there, and tree is growing with the support of the forest department.
So the legends have it that the Banyan's life began when Kabir was here in the late 15th century. But it's not a stretch to imagine that the tree's older, in my opinion, just because it's so large and already spreading its branches when he was here. Now that you've seen it for yourselves, could you see why Kabir might set up and live here for a few years?
Yeah, well, I mean, sitting under the banyan tree is like a big part of Indian culture everywhere. So, especially for sadhus and spiritual people. So, I could very well see him, you know, finding the tree. And I think the story is that he had a banyan tree that he was using as a toothbrush, right? So, or a banyan branch. So the banyan tree is probably here already, and then it maybe grew really big after him. That could be it.
And we saw a lot of banyans across the river.
We did. The funniest thing to me is that there's a temple to Kabir, which is totally not Kabir-like.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, the tree is Kabir's temple. That's how I feel. I mean, that's why he came. I mean, the power of the tree. It has its own holiness and sacred quality to it.
What do you think Kabir would have thought of you describing it as a temple?
I think he would have been okay with that. You know, like he'll talk about like the temple within, you know, the temple in your heart, like that kind of, like some kind of sacred thing inside. Maybe this is the reflection of that sacred thing outside. More so than like a temple.
An actual human-built temple with hierarchy.
This isn't institutional, it's nature, and I think he would be happy with that.
I imagine there was always been a community under this tree, too, that welcomed him in.
Yes, it is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do you think the reverence for Kabirvad reflects something profoundly Indian? Or maybe that's a limiting question, maybe perhaps human, profoundly human.
Yeah, and maybe Indian too. I mean, I think even though I feel sad when I see a lot of littering that happens in India, we have a deep love for trees. We do. It's part of our culture. People worship trees. People intentionally do not cut down trees when there's building things going on. So there's a
sacred groves.
Yeah, and sacred groves. So there's a deep love for trees, and so there's that. And then that also attaches to our general sense of spirituality. No matter what religion you come from, Indians are, I would say, very spiritual people. We believe in things beyond the human part, and I think trees and nature are a big part of that spirituality. So this is a good combination of those elements. I'll add one thing. Just I'm so glad that Vikrant came and that Doug, you came to India. I mean, like, I tell people all the time in America, I'm like, oh, come to India, and no one comes. But you totally came.
Oh yeah, I wasn't going to pass that.
Yeah. So thank you for coming, and now you see, like, you know, we have.
I knew this sprawling banyan on the Narmada River was one of the great trees of the world. For me, it had to be experienced in person. As I learned, Kabir and his songs are best understood when felt in the body through music and shared community. Similarly, Kabirvad is best understood in the body through the senses. Eyes registering the dark, tangled complexity of nature. Skin feeling the cool air. Nose smelling smoke and dusty fallen leaves. Ears listening to the motor of the sugarcane smasher, as well as the sounds of birds, voices, and the sweeping of leaves. Tongue tasting the salty lemonade purchased at the concession stand. This is a different way of experiencing nature than I'm used to in the States. Tree and human presence are integral. Communities of people and communities of nature have coexisted here for centuries. History, culture, and spiritualism are interwoven within the banyan's many trunks. That's what makes this tree special. For many, finding the great Saint Kabir and marveling at Kabirvad are one and the same. Thank you, tree lovers, for joining me on this journey. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. A special, heartfelt thanks is extended to Srinivas Reddy. Without his ideas, hospitality, and love of trees, this exploration of Kabirvad wouldn't have been possible. I'd also like to thank Abhiya Lakia, Jayraj Bhatt, Anuja Bhatt, Sudhanshu Sharma, and Kabir Jasusa for sharing their Kabir poems. Ronak Kavadia and Vikrant Jain spoke thoughtfully about the tree, Kabirvad. The atmospheric Raga Ahaira that we listened to throughout the episode was performed by Srinivas Reddy, Rajiv Bhatt, and Samir Sahasrabudhi. All of the Kabir poems were read beautifully by Garrick Sachdeva, and the poems and translations were provided by Linda Hess. Lastly, many thanks to Professor Hess for sharing her work and perspectives on Kabir's songs and legacy. I enjoyed the interview tremendously. I'll be posting photos of Kabirvad and other subjects included here on Facebook and Instagram. The show website is thisoldtree.show. Once again, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Still, and this is This Old Tree. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to This Old Tree. This Old Tree is sponsored by Schwartz Tree and Landscaping in Cranston, Rhode Island. Professional tree service, landscaping, and plant management. Visit schwartztreecare.com or call 401-941-4440.